September 2023, FBI agents executed a search warrant at a private residence in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. What they discovered inside would bring down one of the most powerful politicians in America. Hidden in closets and safe deposit boxes, investigators found $480,000 worth of gold bars, over $100,000 in cash stuffed inside jackets bearing the senator's name, and a luxury Mercedes-Benz convertible, all allegedly bribes paid to a sitting United States senator in exchange for political favors. This is the story of Senator Bob Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and one of the most shocking corruption cases in modern American political history. This investigation involves foreign governments, Egyptian intelligence operatives, New Jersey businessmen, and a betrayal of public trust that reaches the highest levels of the United States Senate. Stay with me as we break down exactly how this bribery scheme worked, who was involved, and what the evidence reveals about corruption in Washington. Section 1, who is Bob Menendez? To understand the scale of this corruption case, you need to understand the power Bob Menendez wielded in Washington. Robert Menendez served as a United States Senator from New Jersey for over 18 years. But more importantly, he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, one of the most powerful positions in Congress. This committee oversees U.S. foreign policy, foreign aid, arms sales, and diplomatic relationships with every country on earth. As chairman, Menendez had direct influence over which countries received American military equipment, how much foreign aid was distributed, and whether the United States would impose sanctions or provide support to foreign governments. This position made him one of the most influential voices in shaping America's relationships with countries across the globe. Menendez began his political career in local New Jersey politics in the 1980s, eventually serving in the House of Representatives before being appointed to the Senate in 2006. Throughout his career, he positioned himself as a champion of immigrants' rights, foreign policy expertise, and progressive values. But this wasn't Menendez's first brush with federal corruption charges. In 2015, Menendez was indicted on federal corruption charges related to his relationship with Florida ophthalmologist Dr. Salomon Melgen. Prosecutors alleged that Menendez accepted luxury vacations, private jet flights, and campaign contributions from Melgen in exchange for political favors. That trial ended in a hung jury in 2017, and the Justice Department eventually dropped the charges. Menendez survived that scandal and returned to his position of power in the Senate. He won re-election in 2018 and eventually became chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in 2021 when Democrats took control of the Senate. This position of power and the access it provided to foreign governments desperate for American support would become central to the bribery scheme that federal prosecutors would later expose. By 2023, Menendez was married to Nadine Arslanian, a New Jersey businesswoman who would later be charged as his co-conspirator. According to prosecutors, their relationship and eventual marriage became the vehicle through which bribes were funneled to the senator. Section 2, the Egyptian connection. The corruption scheme that would ultimately destroy Menendez's career centered on Egypt, a country that receives over $1.3 billion in U.S. military aid every year. Here's where things get interesting. Egypt's government has been considered an authoritarian regime by human rights organizations for decades. Under President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Egypt has cracked down on political dissent, imprisoned journalists, and been accused of widespread human rights violations. Because of these concerns, the U.S. Congress has repeatedly placed conditions on military aid to Egypt, requiring the State Department to certify that Egypt is making progress on human rights before releasing certain aid packages. As chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez had significant influence over whether these aid packages would be approved or blocked. According to federal prosecutors, this is exactly where the bribery scheme began. Starting around 2018, Menendez allegedly began providing sensitive, non-public U.S. government information to Egyptian officials. This wasn't just casual conversation. Prosecutors allege Menendez provided information about the number and nationality of people working at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, sensitive details about military aid, and internal State Department deliberations about Egypt policy. Why would Egypt want this information? Because it gave Egyptian officials a strategic advantage in their negotiations with the United States government. Knowing internal U.S. positions, personnel details, and aid decisions before they became public allowed Egypt to adjust its strategy and maximize its leverage. But Egypt needed an intermediary, someone who could deliver bribes to Menendez without creating obvious connections between the senator and the Egyptian government. That's where Wael Hana enters the story. Wael Hana, known as Will, was an Egyptian American businessman living in New Jersey who had connections to Egyptian intelligence and military officials. According to prosecutors, Hana became the primary conduit for bribes flowing from Egypt to Menendez. Hana introduced Menendez to Egyptian officials, facilitated meetings between the senator and Egyptian intelligence officers, and allegedly coordinated the payment of bribes in exchange for Menendez's political assistance. The scheme worked like this. Egyptian officials would communicate what they needed from Menendez, whether it was pushing through military aid, blocking congressional restrictions, or providing sensitive information.
Have you ever felt God calling you to invest in real estate, to fund his kingdom, to have more time with your family, or be
Hana would relay these requests to Menendez, and Menendez would use his position to deliver. In exchange, Hana and his associates would provide cash, gold bars, and other valuables to Menendez and his wife. Section 3. The FBI raid and what they found. On June 16, 2022, FBI agents executed a search warrant at Bob Menendez's home in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, a wealthy suburban community overlooking the Hudson River just across from Manhattan. What they discovered inside was staggering. In the master bedroom, agents found envelopes stuffed with cash hidden in closets. In one closet, they discovered over $100,000 in cash, much of it stuffed into jackets and coats, some of which had Menendez's name embroidered on them. In another location, agents found $70,000 in cash inside Nadine Menendez's safe deposit box. But the most dramatic evidence was the gold bars. Lots of them. Agents discovered 13 gold bars worth approximately $480,000. These weren't small pieces of jewelry. These were 1 kilogram gold bars, the kind typically used for investment purposes or stored in bank vaults. Each bar was stamped with serial numbers, making them traceable. This detail becomes crucial later because prosecutors were able to trace the serial numbers on several gold bars back to Wael Hana and another co-conspirator, Fred Dybes, a New Jersey real estate developer who was also seeking political favors from Menendez. Investigators also found a 2019 Mercedes-Benz C300 convertible valued at approximately $60,000. According to prosecutors, this vehicle was provided by New Jersey businessman Jose Uribe as a bribe to Menendez's wife in exchange for the senator's help in shutting down criminal investigations into Uribe's business associates. Beyond the physical valuables, agents also seized computers, phones, and documents that revealed extensive communications between Menendez, his wife, and the alleged co-conspirators. One particularly damning piece of evidence. Prosecutors found Google searches on Menendez's electronic devices for phrases like, "How much is 1 kilo of gold worth?" and searches for gold prices. These searches, conducted around the same time gold bars were being delivered to his home, suggested Menendez was well aware of the value of what he was receiving. The FBI also discovered text messages and emails showing communications between Nadine Menendez and the businessmen providing the bribes, with messages discussing gifts, financial assistance, and references to meetings with the senator. Section 4, the bribery scheme in detail. Federal prosecutors outlined a detailed bribery scheme involving multiple co-conspirators, each seeking different favors from Senator Menendez. The Egyptian monopoly. One of the most brazen aspects of the scheme involved Wael Hana's halal meat certification business. Here's how this worked. In 2019, the Egyptian government announced that all meat imported into Egypt would need to be certified as halal, meaning prepared according to Islamic law. This is a common requirement in Muslim-majority countries. But here's the corrupt part. Egypt granted a monopoly on this certification to a single company, SEG Halal, which was owned by Wael Hana. This wasn't just any business deal. According to prosecutors, Menendez used his position as Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman to pressure U.S. agriculture officials and meat exporters to use Hana's company exclusively for certifications. This gave Hana's company a virtual monopoly worth millions of dollars. In exchange for helping secure this monopoly, Hana allegedly paid Menendez through gold bars, cash payments to Nadine Menendez, and a low-show job where Nadine was paid $10,000 per month as a consultant despite doing little actual work. Text messages reviewed by prosecutors showed Nadine Menendez texting Hana, Congratulations, mon amour de la vie. We are the proud owners of a 2019 Mercedes. This message was sent shortly after Menendez had taken actions beneficial to Hana's business. The Fred Dybes connection. Fred Dybes was a prominent New Jersey real estate developer who was facing federal bank fraud charges. According to prosecutors, Dybes provided gold bars and cash to Menendez in exchange for the senator's help in influencing the criminal case against him. Prosecutors allege that Menendez contacted officials in the New Jersey Attorney General's office to try to influence or disrupt the state's criminal investigation into Dybes' business associate. The gold bars provided by Dybes were particularly important to prosecutors because they could trace the serial numbers. Several of the gold bars found in Menendez's home were traced directly back to Dybes through purchase records and serial number documentation. The Jose Uribe case. Jose Uribe was a New Jersey businessman whose associates were under investigation by state prosecutors. According to the indictment, Uribe provided the Mercedes-Benz convertible to Nadine Menendez in 2018 and 2019 as a bribe. In exchange, prosecutors allege that Menendez contacted officials in the New Jersey Attorney General's office to try to shut down or influence the criminal investigations into Uribe's associates. In a dramatic turn, Jose Uribe pleaded guilty to bribery charges in March 2024 and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, providing testimony against Menendez and the other co-conspirators. Section 5, Menendez's defense and public response. When the charges were announced in September 2023, Bob Menendez held a defiant press conference. For years, I have withdrawn thousands of dollars in cash from my personal savings account, which I have kept for emergencies, and because of the history of my family facing confiscation in Cuba, Menendez said, referring to his parents' experience fleeing Cuba in the 1950s. This became his primary defense. The cash found in his home was his personal savings, accumulated over decades as a precaution based on his family's traumatic history. But prosecutors argued this explanation didn't account for the gold bars, the Mercedes-Benz, the luxury watches, or the pattern of payments that corresponded directly with political actions Menendez took to benefit his co-conspirators. Menendez also claimed that the gold bars were his wife's property, suggesting he had no knowledge of where they came from or how they were acquired. He maintained that if his wife received gifts, she did so independently, and he wasn't aware of them. Legal experts immediately noted the problems with this defense. Menendez and Nadine weren't married until 2020, but prosecutors alleged the bribery scheme began in 2018. Even after their marriage, prosecutors had evidence of text messages and communications showing Menendez was actively involved in coordinating the political favors his co-conspirators were requesting.
In the next 12 to 24 months, I believe America will endure an age of chaos that is likely to be more.
Despite the charges, Menendez initially refused to resign from the Senate. He did, however, step down from his position as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as Senate rules require for members under indictment. This created an awkward situation where Menendez continued to serve in the Senate, vote on legislation, and draw his taxpayer-funded salary while under federal indictment for corruption. Section 6, the trial and verdict. The trial of Bob Menendez began in May 2024 in federal court in Manhattan. It lasted over 2 months and included dramatic testimony from cooperating witnesses, FBI agents, and documentary evidence. Key prosecution evidence: prosecutors presented the physical evidence, photos of the cash, gold bars, and luxury car. They showed jurors the text messages between Nadine Menendez and the co-conspirators. They presented bank records showing suspicious payments. But the most compelling evidence came from cooperating witness Jose Uribe, who testified that he provided the Mercedes-Benz specifically as a bribe to secure Menendez's help in shutting down criminal investigations. Prosecutors also presented evidence of Menendez's communications with Egyptian officials, including testimony that Menendez had ghostwritten a letter to fellow senators encouraging them to lift holds on military aid to Egypt, all while allegedly receiving bribes from individuals connected to the Egyptian government. FBI forensic accountants testified that Menendez's financial disclosures to the Senate didn't match the actual cash and assets found in his home, suggesting he was hiding the source and extent of his wealth. Defense arguments. Menendez's attorneys argued that the senator's actions were consistent with his long-standing foreign policy positions and his role as a representative of New Jersey's large Arab American community. They claimed the cash was from legitimate savings, that the gifts to his wife were personal matters he wasn't aware of, and that prosecutors were criminalizing normal political activities and constituent services. The defense attempted to create reasonable doubt by arguing that meeting with businessmen and taking actions on foreign policy weren't inherently corrupt. They were part of a senator's job. The verdict. On July 16th, 2024, after deliberating for 3 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Bob Menendez was convicted of 16 federal charges, including bribery, extortion, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, acting as a foreign agent. Nadine Menendez was also indicted, but her trial was severed and postponed due to medical issues. She has pleaded not guilty. Co-conspirators Wael Hannah and Fred Dybes were also convicted on multiple counts. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read. Menendez showed little emotion, but the convictions meant he faced decades in federal prison. Section 7. Aftermath and sentencing. Following the guilty verdict, pressure mounted on Menendez to resign from the Senate. Democratic leadership, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, called for Menendez's immediate resignation. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy echoed these calls, stating that Menendez could no longer effectively represent the people of New Jersey. Menendez initially resisted, but on August 20th, 2024, he announced he would resign from the Senate effective August 31st, 2024, ending his nearly two-decade career in the upper chamber. His resignation letter was brief and didn't acknowledge the convictions, instead thanking his constituents and staff for their service. Menendez's sentencing is scheduled for January 29th, 2025. He faces a maximum sentence of over 200 years in prison, though federal sentencing guidelines will likely result in a sentence of 10 to 30 years. Given Menendez's age, he was 70 at the time of conviction. Even a sentence on the lower end of that range could amount to a life sentence. Legal experts expect prosecutors to seek a significant prison term to send a message about corruption at the highest levels of government. Menendez's attorneys will likely argue for leniency based on his age, his decades of public service, and the support letters from constituents. The convictions of Hannah and Dybes mean they also face substantial prison time. Their sentencing hearings are scheduled around the same time as Menendez's. Section 8. Broader implications. The Menendez case raises serious questions about corruption in Congress and the influence of foreign governments over American politicians. Foreign influence. The fact that a chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, one of the most powerful foreign policy positions in the U.S. government, was allegedly acting on behalf of a foreign government in exchange for bribes is deeply troubling. Egypt isn't an adversary nation like Russia or China, but it's also not a close democratic ally like Canada or the UK. Egypt's government has significant strategic interests that sometimes conflict with U.S. policy goals, particularly around human rights, regional stability, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The idea that Egyptian officials could essentially purchase influence over U.S. foreign policy through bribes paid to a senator represents a fundamental corruption of American democratic governance, congressional ethics. The Menendez case also highlights weaknesses in congressional ethics enforcement. Despite his previous corruption trial in 2015 to 2017, Menendez was able to return to power and eventually become chairman of a major committee. Critics argue that the Senate's ethics rules are too weak and that members facing serious corruption allegations shouldn't be allowed to hold leadership positions. Current Senate rules require members under indictment to step down from committee chairmanships, but they don't require resignation from the Senate itself. This meant Menendez continued to collect his $174,000 annual salary and vote on legislation even while under federal indictment. Financial disclosure failures. Menendez's case also exposed problems with congressional financial disclosure requirements. Senators are required to file annual financial disclosure forms detailing their assets, income, and gifts. Menendez's disclosures didn't include the hundreds of thousands of dollars in gold bars, cash, and other valuables prosecutors later discovered in his home. This suggests either deliberate fraud in his filings or that the disclosure system lacks effective enforcement mechanisms to catch false or incomplete reports. Section 9, Lessons and Warning Signs. What can we learn from the Menendez corruption case about how bribery schemes operate at the highest levels of government?
Only in America, people trample on each other to get a good deal exactly one day after.
Pattern recognition. The Menendez scheme followed a pattern common in public corruption cases. First, A person in power has something of value, in this case, influence over foreign policy and military aid decisions worth billions of dollars. Second, individuals or groups with interest in those decisions identify the person in power and establish a relationship, in this case, through social connections and Menendez's wife. Third, bribes are structured to appear as gifts, business relationships, or personal favors rather than direct cash for votes transactions. The halal meat monopoly, the consulting job for Nadine, and the gifts of gold bars were all attempts to disguise bribes as legitimate transactions. Fourth, the person in power takes actions that benefit the bribers while claiming those actions are based on policy preferences or constituent services rather than corruption. Red flags. Several red flags should have raised concerns earlier. Menendez's wife suddenly received a no-show job paying $10,000 per month from a businessman with interest before the senator's committee luxury gifts. Appearing around the same time, the senator took actions beneficial to the gift givers. Unexplained wealth that didn't match the senator's reported income meetings between the senator and foreign government officials that weren't properly documented or disclosed institutional failures. The Menendez case also represents failures by the institutions meant to prevent corruption. Senate ethics reviews didn't catch the undisclosed gifts and income. Federal agencies didn't immediately investigate when Menendez attempted to intervene in criminal cases. And the political system allowed someone who had already faced corruption charges to return to a position of immense power. The bigger picture. The conviction of Bob Menendez marks one of the most significant corruption cases involving a sitting U.S. senator in decades. It's a reminder that corruption can reach the highest levels of American government, that even powerful committee chairmen with decades of experience can betray their oath of office for personal enrichment. But it's also a reminder that the justice system, when allowed to function, can hold even the most powerful officials accountable. The FBI agents who executed that search warrant, the prosecutors who built the case, and the jury that delivered the verdict all played their part in ensuring that no one is above the law, not even a United States senator. As we approach Menendez's sentencing in January 2025, the question remains, will the sentence be substantial enough to deter future corruption? Will Congress reform its ethics rules to prevent similar schemes? And will voters demand higher standards from their elected officials? The Menendez case is closed, but the broader fight against corruption in American politics continues. If you found this investigation valuable, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We cover federal investigations, financial crimes, and political accountability that mainstream media often misses. Drop a comment below. Do you think Menendez will face serious prison time, or will he receive leniency because of his age and years of service? What reforms do you think Congress needs to prevent corruption like this? And check out our investigation into the Hunter Biden pardon scandal, another case of political privilege and justice system manipulation that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching the Enforcement Files. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next investigation.
I'm a doctor, and my passion is to alleviate arthritis pain using nothing but natural methods. Can you guess the top 3 foods that I would recommend you to